Welcome, my name is Greg Whitsitt.
And I'm Amy.
And this is the series Winning Hearts, Making Disciples in East Asia. And we are looking at the East Asian Mission Challenge.
Today we're going to be looking at the history of Buddhism. Kind of need to know a little bit of a background. You know, there's many people who have wondered, who is Buddha? Where did he come from? Was he really real? And so we're going to be looking at his story today, trying to understand who the Buddha was and how he came to the conclusions that he did, what that led to Buddhism.
You know, Buddha lived, there are evidence that he was a historical figure, and archaeology has shown different things, and so we actually want to know something about the times he lived to better understand what his quest was, the questions he was trying to answer. So from about the year 2000 BC up until about 500 BC is known as the Vedic period. The Vedas were written by sages, wise people, ascetics, after intense meditation. That's key. Meditation was a key part of Hindu and Buddhist religions. And these scriptures are said to be the creation of Brahma. And there are 4 types of Vedic literature. There are blessings, rituals, and then there's commentary on those rituals. Rituals play a big part in the Hindu faith, and then also meditations and philosophy. Those who do not accept the authority of the Vedas are considered heterodox or heretics. They're outside of what would be considered Hindu. Now we must understand that Hindu is a modern term to describe these beliefs in the Vedas from India. Actually, that's not a term that comes out of India. It was more from Europeans and Westerners who kind of labeled them as such. So there's a lot of diversity, but the Veda scriptures, the Vedas, are actually the heart of Hindus. This period ends with the Mahajanapada period. And let's take a look at that. That begins around the year 600 and goes up into the 300s. And in the Buddhist scriptures, we know from this time that there were 16 kingdoms in what we would consider India today. These kingdoms were oligarchies, and basically what that means is that they're basically these wealthy warriors who ruled over the people. And the warriors themselves are second caste. You know, in the Indian subcontinent, you have a caste system. The highest caste are the Brahmin priests. The second one coming down will be the warriors, the kings, the nobility, and then you have others below that, the merchants, and more of the farmers and laborers, servants, and then, of course, the untouchables that were considered outside of that caste system, but below that. So the warrior and rulers came out of that second caste. Siddhartha Gautama was born as a son of a small king or a chieftain. So he was a part of this second caste, the warrior caste. Siddhartha's father was chief of the Shakya Gana Sangha, which basically means the Shakya was the name of the place, but the Gana Sangha is a smaller highland city-state that was kind of on the periphery of these larger Indian kingdoms, the 16 that I mentioned here. And so often you hear today that Buddha is called the Shakyamuni Buddha. Muni referring to a type of ascetic, and Shakya being the city-state or tribe that he was a clan that he was a part of. That's right. So there's a map of about the area where he's from, and it's just there in the foothills in the Himalayas. Now, Amy, why don't you talk to us a little bit more about the ascetics of that time?
Yes. During that time, there were ascetics who took quite a bit of time denouncing the world, looking for spiritual answers, and they were called the Sramanas. And these Sramanas would participate in extreme fasting. They would go naked. They would do intense meditation. Yoga was part of this. Many of you have probably heard of yoga. It has its roots way back here with the Sramanas, and they were just extreme ascetics who denounced all worldly pleasures, I guess, to try to find answers, to try to find understanding. The goal was to obtain liberation, or moksha, liberation from suffering, from confusion, from lack of understanding. This led to Jainism. Jainism grew out of that. Some of you may have heard of that as well, in the 9th century BC. And the unique thing about the Sramanas is that they also had somewhat of a hierarchy. There were masters who became very good at a certain discipline. Perhaps it was the extreme fasting and meditation and all of this, and he would teach disciples how to do this and train them until they became masters themselves, or they moved on, decided it wasn't their thing.
So let's talk about yoga for a second. This is a spiritual practice, and the earliest records of yoga are actually pre-Veda. So it actually comes from way back. It's a very old practice, but it was popularized by the Sramana movement during this Mahajanapada period. Now, yoga is physical, mental, and spiritual. It's bringing all those together. And the ultimate goal, as we saw already with some of what we already shared, is liberation, or enlightenment is how Buddhists would talk about this. Hindus, Buddhists, and Jain all use this. And you could state the goal or the purpose of yoga in different ways, but let's just look at a few here. Discovering personal dysfunction and achieve inner peace. Okay, dysfunction is emphasized versus the word sin. Awaken consciousness is the next one, of coexistence with the universe. A third, path to omniscience and enlightened conscience. And the fourth purpose, a statement here we have of yoga, a supernatural means of entering other bodies or multiple bodies. So you can see that there's this metaphysical reality. It's not just a physical exercise, although a lot of people see it as just a physical exercise. Actually, it's a doorway into something much, much more behind it.
We want to answer the question, who is the Buddha? We already mentioned that he was born as Siddhartha Gautama. His father was King Sudana, chief of the Sakya clan, and his mother was Queen Maya. And the story goes that Queen Maya one night was sleeping, and she dreamt that a white elephant came and entered into her side. Some stories say it was a white elephant with 6 tusks, so it was a very interesting elephant. Entered into her side, and she became pregnant, and 10 months later, she had the baby. But according to the common practice of the Shakya clan or tribe or city-state, she traveled from her city-state to her father's city-state to have the baby. But she didn't make it in time. She made it to Lumpini Park, which I believe is in modern-day Nepal.
Southern Nepal.
And she had the baby under a tree. And it is said that various gods came. Brahma was there. Some of the others were there. Vishnu was there, helped to deliver the baby, witnessed the birth of this baby. But just as the elephant came into her side, the baby came out her side. And when he was born, the story says that he was not an infant, he was an infant-sized man. So he was just proportionately smaller. And he could talk and he could walk. And as he took his first steps, instead of leaving footprints, he left lotus blossoms under his feet. So this was a very marvelous, miraculous kind of birth in the story of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. His name means he who achieves his aim. There's a little bit of question about when he was born, but most scholars believe that he was born around 563 BC. He lived for 80 years, so he died around 483. And this would have been about the time he was born towards the end of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So he's at the transition from Babylon to Medo-Persia. So some of his contemporaries would have been Zechariah, Haggai, so some of the later prophets. Possibly Esther would have been a contemporary of his, so it's very possible that he knew some of these stories as well. But that was the time period that he was born and lived. 5 days after he was born, his father held a naming ceremony for him and had invited all the nobles and everybody from around, probably even from different city-states, included were 8 Brahmin priests who came, and he asked them to predict his future. And so they looked at him and they found, I don't remember how many, but a whole bunch of different marks on his body that were lucky marks, auspicious marks. And on his feet, his fingers and his toes were all even. He didn't have the long and short, they were all even. He had a bump on the top of his head, special marks on the soles of his feet. There were many different marks that these priests believed were auspicious. And so they unanimously came to the conclusion that he was going to be one of 2 things. He would either become a great king, greater than his father perhaps, or he would become a great holy man. His father, hearing this, thought, I would like my son to be a great king like me.
Only natural, isn't it?
That's
like
right.
your son to follow in your steps and become something great.
And so he spent a lot of time and effort protecting his son. He kept him in the palace where he grew up just enjoying all the luxuries of life. The first 29 years of his life, actually, they consider just the period of enjoyment of his life.
So we can actually look at Buddha's life. We'll just call him Buddha because it's much easier to say. If you look at Buddha's life, there's actually 4 phases. The first phase is up to the age of 29. He got married to a princess from a neighboring king or chieftain, and they were both 16 at the time, and they had 1 child. But it kind of came to a point where he wasn't really satisfied with this luxurious lifestyle compared to others.
Yeah, he felt that this material, all this wealth, it wasn't bringing the happiness and the fulfillment that he wanted, and he felt that there had to be something outside of this. There had to be more. And so he worked with somebody in the palace, a charioteer or somebody, and they took an excursion outside of the palace. His father didn't know that he had left. He went out, and as he visited his realm, visited his people, he saw 4 different sights. First, he saw an old man, somebody bent over and just crippled and hobbling, gray, and it troubled him. He hadn't seen this before. His father had been very careful to make sure it was young people, and he hadn't seen this elderly form. He hadn't seen what happens when you become old. He saw a sick man. How he never became sick, I don't know, but somehow he saw a very diseased person, and that troubled him even more. And as they continued on, he saw a dead body. Perhaps they were having a funeral, and he saw death. And these were all things that shocked him. He wondered, what in the world? This is so strange and so foreign. He didn't know what to do with it. Finally, he saw a religious ascetic, probably one of these sramanas that we talked about earlier, who was practicing this extreme meditation and fasting. And he began just puzzling over in his mind as he went back to the palace how to make sense of everything that he saw.
And so that was something, he just had that dissatisfaction. And actually some people say, well, is it possible that you could live for 29 years and never see sickness or death and these things? But the point is, whether it was actually literally true or symbolically the way the story goes, the point was he was not satisfied with the answers of why these things happen. Why is this part of the human experience? And so he left the palace. There's many stories you can read online about this. We just want to summarize briefly. But he left the palace, and in the middle of the night, so he did it without his family's blessing, but he went out to search for the answers. And so where did he go? Well, he can't go and study with the Brahmin priests. He's the wrong caste. So he went after and looked for Sramana to look and see what they could offer him, these ascetics. And he actually was a disciple of 3 different masters. And with each one, he mastered their form of meditation. Each one, the first was a very strenuous exercise and discipline to learn that meditation and to master that. But when he achieved it, that master said, well, you're my peer now, so you can also help teach. But he wasn't satisfied because he didn't find the answer. So he went after the second and the third, looking for answers. It got so bad, as you can see from a lot of Buddhist art, that he was killing himself from starvation. because of his fasting and this sort of thing. And the story says that he actually fell in a roadway or somewhere and into a puddle, and he almost died because he didn't have the strength to hold himself out of the water. And a lady came by and offered him some rice milk. And to the horror of his 5 disciples that were following him, he took some food and ate it. And they said, "Oh, you've really, this is incredible. How could you do this? You've broken your vows. We're not going to follow you anymore." But he said, this is an extreme that is no better than the extreme of living in wealth. These extremes are not good. There must be a balanced way, a middle way. And so that's what he decided he wanted to look for. And so he then sat down under the Bodhi tree, and his focus was to look for the answer. What is the answer to suffering? And can it be stopped?
He committed himself not to get up until he had found the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many, many stories. It said that a god came and was trying to distract him from the meditation and from this deep concentration, and tried all sorts of things. Tried flooding him, tried enticing him with beautiful women, tried all kinds of things, but he was able to meditate beyond that and just ignore it all. And as the flood came, there was a Naga serpent who came and coiled itself under him and lifted it up out of the water, shielded him with his hood. So a lot of times, especially in Theravada Buddhism, you'll see images of the Buddha sitting up on a serpent with a hood over him. But at the age of 35, he reached enlightenment. And that's what Buddha means. Buddha means the enlightened one. And so that's the point that his name changed. Or not really a name change, but it became his title, the Buddha.
Jesus of Nazareth is known as Christ, right? It's a title. And so Siddhartha Gautama took the title Buddha, the enlightened one, or you could say the awakened one, excuse me. So what did he discover?
He discovered several things. First, he discovered dukkha. Dukkha is just the concept that life is suffering. No way around it, no other answer. In its simplest form, life is suffering. Second, samudaya. The desire is the source of suffering. So he was trying to understand, where does suffering come from? It's from desire. If we get rid of desire, then we won't have suffering. Then he was thinking, how do we end the suffering? Well, we can end it through cessation called nirodha.
Oftentimes that's also called nirvana.
Yes.
Right? These 2 terms are used here.
Nirodha. These are 3 of the 4 important truths that he discovered. After realizing these things, he meditated for another 7 days, contemplating this nirodha. How do we attain it? If it can be stopped, what are the practices? What do we need to do in order to cease the suffering, to reach the nirvana?
So as he was meditating, these are some of the things that he discovered. And it's important to understand that Buddha did not receive revelation from a god, but he discovered within these answers. Okay, so it's a discovery, not a revelation. And so there were 3 core concepts that he came to understand. They're called the 3 seals. The first one is anicca. Anicca is impermanence. Things are always, ever changing. Secondly, like we just looked at in the first noble truth, is dukkha, suffering, and the unsatisfactoriness of existence. The third is anatta, and I have seen many commentators and teachers in Buddhism say that this is the unique contribution of Buddhism to the world religions, to faith in the world, that no other religion quite has this teaching. Anatta means no self, or not self. And it's a difficult concept, because then the question is, well, so if there is no self, what am I? Who are you, right? And so he went on to discover and explore the illusion of me, or natta. You put the A in front and there's no me. right? So this is nata. So the illusion of me has 5 skandhas, or khandhas, depends on your language. The first is form, or rupa. This is one's body and the external material world around us, the universe. Then there are feelings, or the vedana. This is the sense of pleasant or unpleasant, okay, and how we experience pleasantness and unpleasantness. Even the animal kingdom have hunger, or feeling full, or they feel fear or anger, so these pleasant, unpleasant feelings. Then there is volition, the sankhara. These are the karmic thoughts, the compulsions, the prejudices, and these kinds of things. The fourth one is perception, or sanya, the ability to recognize things. Okay? Oh, Haki, that's you. Okay, so that's the concept of perception. And then the last one is consciousness. That's pretty simple to understand. It's the awareness, and this is vijnana. In some languages, the vinyan is known as a person's soul in the modern Thai or Lao languages, but the Pali is vijnana. So these 5 components, or skandhas, are actually what make up the idea of me. And these are the things that Buddha discovered as he was meditating in his enlightenment. Now, we're not going to take time to explain this whole chart, but let me just summarize to say that the 12 dependent originations mean that if this, then that. If this, then that. So automatically, if you have one thing, the next will follow. Does that make sense? So if you have a water wheel and the water is coming this way, the wheel will turn and it will naturally fall down, right? So you have it's coming and it's going, it's coming and it's going. It leads to something else. So past life causes and present life causes will result in present life effects and future life effects. So this was another part of his teachings. And again, a lot of this is rooted in Hindu concepts. But it was some new discoveries that Buddha took it to another level, or in another direction. And so the fourth noble truth was the pathway to cessation, which was called the Eightfold Path.
Have you heard of the Eightfold Path? So Buddha actually discovered what is called the Eightfold Path. Some of you may have heard of that. It's very popular. You may have seen the wheel. Very, very common in Buddhist art. In particular, you'll see it on temples in different places.
With the 8 spokes there, right?
Right, the 8
representing
spokes.
The Eightfold Path.
Exactly. So the first one is right understanding, followed by right thought, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And then right effort, right awareness, and right meditation. And when you put these together, the first 2, understanding and thought, lead to wisdom. So if you follow these, you will have ultimate wisdom. The next 3, speech, action, and livelihood, have to do with our relationship with other people. And so it's actually guiding ethical conduct. So you will be a moral person. You will be a nice person, a pleasant or good person. And then the last 3, effort, awareness, and meditation, lead you to mental discipline. Remember when we talked about golf in the previous episode? It's a mental game, and that's where this comes from, that it is all about how well you can focus your mind and you can control your mind and your thoughts. So
after he reached enlightenment and he found the 4 noble truths and the Eightfold Path of how to lead to the life of the cessation of suffering, he was satisfied. He was happy. He had discovered what he was searching for. And we don't have time for the whole story, but there's a period of time there when he didn't have a need to do anything more. But as the story goes, people and gods came to him and compelled him and really encouraged him. You need to share your insights with others. And so eventually that's exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. And he would teach those who requested to learn. And even to this day, that's the common trend. And oftentimes, in some traditions, you must ask a monk 3 times before he will say yes and come to your home and offer blessings or do different things to help you. Mm-hmm. Because of that part of the story where he resisted at first and said, everyone must find their own way. This is advanced knowledge, and people may have a hard time understanding it. So he didn't want to burden people with information that they wouldn't know how to use. but he spent the rest of his life, or 45 years, making disciples and sharing with others.
And at the end, he lived to be 80 years old, and it's believed actually that he died of food poisoning. So even though he had this enlightenment, he still had a very real life that he was living.
As the story goes, he took the food knowing that it wasn't clean, but out of compassion for the person who served it. And then instead of calling it his death, they call it the para-nirvana, or the para-nibbana. Depends on which, whether it's a Sanskrit or Pali you're reading, but the idea is that he passed to the state of nirvana. Okay? So let's end with a couple questions, Amy.
Yes, for those of you who are viewing at home, we invite you to go to our website, cr.globalmissioncenters.org. You can download the workbook and follow along with the questions with your small group. So we have 2 questions for today. The first question is, non-Buddhists may say that the story of Buddha sounds like a fairy tale. How might Buddhists understand Jesus' story? If the story of Buddha sounds a little strange to us, how do you think that they might perceive the story of Jesus? And the second question, Siddhartha Gautama was a seeker of a better way for people and castes. What similarities and differences do you see between the teachings of Buddhism and Christianity? Certainly there are some of each. So take a few minutes now and discuss that together.
Question number 1. Questions.
This first part of the birth sounds really like a fairy tale. Like it sounds like legend for me. But the other actually sounds very real. But I don't know. Maybe also it's very hard for me to believe.
Buddhist think about Jesus is the one of the disciples of Buddhism. Yes. Like one of the Buddha, right?
Jesus came and made go from
Yeah, Buddha, like